been discussing about Greek philosophy, and we had been discussing about the middle Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. We continue further with Plato's epistemology in our discussion today. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Now, amongst the various texts that Plato had written, which are famously called as dialogues, we have had discussed few of them in our previous discussions. We will be picking up yet another very interesting dialogue entitled as Meno in today's epistemology, which is entitled as Plato's epistemology. Now, Meno is one of Plato's most compact but philosophically rich dialogues, and it is often assigned to an introduction to Plato's epistemology because it raises how we can learn what knowledge is and whether knowledge is innate. If we talk about the dramatic frame and purpose, we see that the characters or the protagonists, as in most of Plato's dialogues, is Socrates. And Meno here is a young Thessalian aristocrat, a slave boy, unnamed, and later Anytus appears briefly by implication. So in Meno, the protagonist is Socrates, and he questions or dialogues with a slave boy who is not really named, and these are the two central characters. When we talk about the setting and occasion, we see that Meno asks Socrates whether virtue can be taught. The question quickly turns into a deeper inquiry, that is, what is virtue? And then into the epistemological problem, how can we search for something we do not know? The journal, if we are to talk about it, is a short aporotic dialogue that mixes ethical and epistemological inquiry. It does not resolve everything, but performs a philosophical diagnosis. Now, in the main stages of the dialogue, we see that firstly, Meno's opening question and first answers about virtue takes place. Meno asks, can virtue be taught? Socrates first says they must know what virtue is before deciding whether it is teachable. To this, Meno's first attempts to define virtue chips in, and he says that he first offers examples. Different virtues for different persons, man, woman, child, ruler. And this is not a definition but a list of instances. Socrates presses for a single essence, a common feature present in all instances that would be the definition of virtue. Now, gradually, in the second stage, we stumble into something which is popularly called as Meno's paradox, or the paradox of inquiry. Meno's collective definitions is something which we all need to take note of. At one point, Meno proposes virtue is the desire for good things and the ability to obtain them. Socrates refutes this. Desire for bad things exists. Many who obtain good things do so unjustly. We should recollect that Socrates was popular in using his methodology, which is called as Socratic irony or midwifery, where he asks the interlocutor to firstly question, and once they starts questioning or rather giving answers to his questions, he then entraps them in his dialogical conversation, so much so that then they realize that whatever Socrates is stating or sharing is the correct way out. So that then to this, Meno offers virtue is justice or a part of justice. Socrates finds this unsatisfactory. He asks for a definition in the sense of a form that makes something what it is. Today's we come to the part of Meno's paradox, the famous puzzle, which is Meno asks Socrates how inquiry is possible to all. His paradox runs, if you know what you seek, inquiry is unnecessary. If you do not know what you seek, inquiry is impossible. You wouldn't recognize the answer even if you found it. This raises the epistemic problem: how can learning, which is true discovery, occur? It looks like either futile repetition or lucky guess. The other section of Meno's dialogue is the Socrates' response, which he takes note of a recollection. Socrates' proposed solution is the doctrine of recollection. The soul is immortal and has seen the forms. Learning is recollecting knowledge the soul already had. Demonstration with the slave boy. Socrates, without instructing the slave in geometry, uses questioning the Elanchus methodology to draw correct geometric truths out of him. A demonstration intended to show that the boy recollects knowledge. The point is methodological, where through proper questioning a teacher can elicit dormant knowledge. This makes inquiry possible because the soul remembers. Plato uses the example to support the claim that some knowledge is innate, or at least that the soul has grasped the forms prior to embodied life. And this is interesting because, as a footnote, we can add, or we may add, that like the Indian philosophy, Plato too did believe in the transmigration of the soul, that is, the immortality of the soul. Please note that mostly Western philosophers' soul and mind are taken as synonymous, but for Plato, soul is immortal unlike the body. Going ahead, from recollection to an assessment of knowledge, which is the category of true belief versus knowledge, is where we further discuss in Meno. After the demonstration, Socrates examines the status of the slave's answers. Is the slave's correct assertion knowledge or mere opinion or true opinion? Socrates distinguishes between true belief, doxa, elethes, and he says that a correct opinion that can guide action is true belief, and knowledge is episteme, true belief with an account or logos. This anticipates the true belief plus account move later in Theaetetus. Meno asks what the account is. Socrates admits difficulty. One must be able to give an explanatory account for the belief for it to be knowledge. But what counts as an account? The dialogue then shifts back to teachability. Socrates argues the following sorts of points. If virtue were teachable, you would expect teachers of virtue and students becoming virtuous. But historical observation, example, good men dying without sons who are virtuous, makes this doubtful. Perhaps virtue is a gift from the gods, or a kind of true opinion inspired, which can guide but is not knowledge, or a mix. Further, the aporetic ending, where there is no decisive answer. Meno ends without a final demonstration that virtue is teachable. Plato leaves the relationship between recollection, true belief, and knowledge unresolved in a way that invites further inquiry. So, what are the key philosophical moves and arguments here? We see the paradox of inquiry, or Meno's paradox as popularly called. The formulation is, if you do not know what you are looking for, how can you search for it? If you do know it, you don't need to search. The philosophical function is this is not just an idle puzzle. It controls the epistemic conditions of learning and method. If the paradox stands, empirical discovery or justified inquiry becomes mysterious. Socratic reply: learning is a recollection. The soul has prior knowledge. So both alternatives in the paradox are avoided. The demonstration with the slave is meant to show the method's success. Doctrine of recollection claims the soul is immortal, having seen the forms before birth. Sensory experience can trigger recollection. Correct answers are remembered. Knowledge is not formed afresh from sensory data alone, rather, the senses awaken latent knowledge. The purpose in the text: recollection is employed as an account of how inquiry is possible and how to secure the status of mathematical knowledge as certain. The philosophical weight, we see that this is an early statement of innatism or rationalism, the idea that reason can yield knowledge independent of or prior to sense experience. The slave boy demonstration or methodological importance. Now what happens? Socrates asks leading questions. The slave reaches the geometric results without prior schooling. Interpretations are Plato's intent, the traditional way to show recollection. The boy remembers geometric truths. The skeptical reading is that the demonstration might show the power of Socratic questioning to structure the slave's beliefs rather than reveal innate knowledge. The boy's cognitive faculties are stimulated. He generalizes correctly under guidance. The philosophical caution: Plato uses the story as a suggestive proof, not a logically all right demonstration. This brings us to Plato's Epistemology, part 4 of Meno, which is the true belief versus knowledge, or the proto-JTB, justified true belief. True opinion or belief versus knowledge. Socrates argues that true opinions can guide action. They are useful, but without an account, they are unstable. They might run away and are less valuable than knowledge. Account or logos. For Socrates, knowledge requires the ability to give an account, but account is ambiguous. Definition, explanation, reason. This ambiguity is central to Plato's later epistemological struggles, Theaetetus. Implication: Plato is moving towards an analysis of knowledge that separates mere correctness from justified understanding. Meno as an epistemological work, Themes and Legacy. It directly asks how learning is possible. The paradox of inquiry is a canonical epistemological puzzle. Philosophy of education, philosophy of mind, and epistemology all grapple with versions of this question. How can we come to know what we lack? Plato's recollection is one historically influential solution. Later philosophers propose different replies: empiricism, rationalism, constructivism. It proposes a rationalistic model, recollection or anamnesis. Plato here is one of the earliest sources of innatism, where innate ideas are celebrated. Innatism suggests that some knowledge is prior to experience. This foreshadows rationalist movements such as later Descartes, Leibniz, and others. The dialogue privileges geometry and mathematics as domains where recollection seems plausible. Their truths appear necessary and not empirically derived. Further, it distinguishes true belief from knowledge and begins an analysis of justification. Plato's talk of true belief with an account anticipates the later JTB model, which is belief plus truth plus justification or account. Meno is a part of the genealogical development that leads to more precise analysis of justification and the status of knowledge. Methodology: Socratic questioning as epistemic method. Socratic elanches demonstrates both the dialectical method of inquiry and its limits. Questioning can expose ignorance and can stimulate recollection or the articulation of beliefs, but it does not always produce final definitions. The slave boy episode also models pedagogical method, not telling but drawing out capabilities. Raises issues still central in modern epistemology. Nature of concept acquisition. Here questions such as, are concepts innate or constructed? How do we become able to form universal definitions from particular experience? Knowledge as explanation versus mere true belief. Debates about what counts as justification. Internal reasons, external reliability, causal connections, safety, all respond to the intuition Plato probes. Role of luck and method. Plato is sensitive to the instability of correct but unaccounted for belief. Modern Gautier literature addresses similar issues. Critical comments and philosophical problems. Firstly, let's see the strength of Plato's approach in Meno. He raises the right question. The paradox pushes epistemology into the foreground of philosophy of science, education, and mind. Highlights the special status of mathematics. Using geometry to test ideas about knowledge is powerful because mathematical truths seem necessary and non-empirical. Psychological insight. Plato recognizes that methods of questioning can transform the cognitive state of a learner. The problems or objections, the empirical plausibility of recollection. The metaphysical premise that souls existed prior to birth and saw the forms is controversial and metaphysically heavy. Modern theories prefer psychological or developmental accounts. The slave demonstration is ambiguous. Did Socrates elicit innate knowledge or simply guide reasoning? Contemporary cognitive science leans towards the latter. Scaffolding helps learners infer rules from experience. Problems or objections, vagueness about account. Plato never fully spells out what an account must be, which motivates later epistemologists to refine justification. Circularity risk. The idea that the soul has knowledge that must be recollected begs the question of how the soul originally came to know. The dialogue assumes rather than demonstrates immortality and prior knowledge. So we see that Meno, in the later epistemology, the influence and echoes the source for rational tradition. Plato's emphasis on recollection influenced later rationalists and the continuing debate with empiricists. They can be rightly called as the forerunners to JTB. The true belief plus account move anticipates the intuition behind justified true belief. Meno contributes the historical depth of the JTB project. Method and pedagogy. Socratic method as pedagogical model appears in educational theory and constructivist debates. Modern reinterpretations. Cognitive scientists and philosophers often reinterpret the slave demonstration as an example of guided discovery, learning rather than literal recollection. Now, some of the short glossary of key terms in Meno is number 1, recollection, which is the doctrine that learning is remembering what the soul knew before birth. Doxa, opinion or belief, often contrasted with episteme or knowledge. Episteme is clearly knowledge for Socrates and Plato, which is systematic, stable, and tied to reason and forms. Logos is the account or explanation central to distinguishing knowledge from true belief. Elanches is the Socratic method of cross-examination. So this was about the Meno that we have taken the key takeaways from the glossary to the other forms that shows how Socrates has had been a forerunner of rationalism in his own right. Now we are going ahead with Plato's epistemology with yet another dialogue, the Sophist. Now Sophist is one of Plato's rich late dialogues for thinking about knowledge, falsehood, language, and the relation between ontology and epistemology. If we look at the frame and purpose, we see the dramatic voice, the central interlocutor is the Eleatic stranger, not Socrates. Speaking in the company of young Theaetetus' friends, a series in the trilogy with Theaetetus and Sophist exploring knowledge, non-being and the statesman. The main problem is who is the sophist? Plato treats the question philosophically rather than merely polemically. Sophistry raises issues about falsehood, semblance and the possibility of saying things that are not. This forces Plato to control a paradox. If what is being, then how can we meaningfully speak about or form beliefs about what is not non-being? How can false statements be possible? The philosophical aim to define the sophist by a careful method of division de races, and in doing so to resolve how false statements and error are possible, a central epistemological question crops up. The dialogue's main argumentative structure, firstly, method of division. The stranger uses a top-down classificatory method. Start with a broad genus and successively divide into species until the subject, the sophist, is isolated. Division proceeds by pairing opposites, refining categories, and collecting the right definition of locating where the sophist fits in the tree of kinds. Epistemology, division, aims to produce precise definitions that can be cognitively grasped and used to distinguish true knowledge from mere appearance. Going ahead in the sophist is the Eleatic puzzle, non-being and falsehood. A puzzle moves the account. If only being is and non-being is not, then how can we speak of or think about non-being? If non-being is literally nothing, then talk of it seems impossible. Yet we can assert falsehoods and be mistaken. The stranger diagnoses the problem. The trouble comes from assuming non-being is equal to nothingness in the absolute sense. Instead, the stranger develops a relational notion, which is non-being is otherness, the difference, relative to some reference. Something can be a non-A or not A without being nothing at all. This move allows Plato to admit false statements. A declarative sentence can be false because it asserts that something belongs to category A when in fact it belongs to a different category B. So falsehood is grounded in mismatch between a proposition and ontological reality, which is a misclassification, not in relation to absolute nothingness. The account of likeness, image and imitation, the sophist is characterized as a producer of images and appearances. He creates likeness, then deceive in speech or in art, and so he traffics in semblance rather than truth. Plato distinguishes between knowledge, which grasps forms and true relations, and semblance, which grasps only appearance and can mislead. The sophist manipulates semblance, producing beliefs that are not anchored by true logos. This section links ontology with what things are to epistemology, what we can know. Error is possible because our representations can stand in for reality but fail to match it. The final moves defining the sophist. By successive divisions, Plato locates the sophist among those who produce appearances, employ logos without knowledge, and profit by deception. The sophist's craft involves persuasive speech and appearance without the grounds of knowledge. Epistemologically, he exploits the gap between belief and knowledge, between persuasive opinion and true logos. Now, we will be checking henceforth in our next discussion about the epistemological themes and forms, the key epistemological move, the falsehood and the possibility of error, language, reference and prediction, epistemic upshot, knowledge versus opinion or doxa, the method of dialectic as epistemic technology, and images, imitation and epistemic trust. And we will also see the epistemic vulnerability, the critical implication, and we will also be picking up important questions like how the sophist contributes to core epistemological issues, connections of ontology to epistemology, language and meaning, method and definition, sophistry as epistemic malpractices, and more in our upcoming class. Stay tuned. Thank you so much.